Hello, everyone. It's so good to see you. Oh, I'm just gonna double check with Mr. Nick here just to make sure I did everything right. I haven't done this in a while. So, Mr. Nick, I hit stream here.
And it should be, if you go back over to, there you go. So you are live on your stream health. It sometimes has a little bit of a gap there.
Okay.
It does look like you're good.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Hi, everybody. All right. I just needed to double check because, if you've ever watched me do one of these in the past, I always tend to mess it up and do something a little bit weird. Like, there have been a couple times now where I've talked for maybe like 20 whole minutes before I realized that the computer wasn't recording. And it's a little bit embarrassing, and then I have to start all over again while everybody else is wondering where I am, while I'm just talking to myself and talking to something not recording me for like 20 minutes. So it's really good to be back leading one of these digital chats that's actually recording me and I'm talking to everybody, so that's very exciting. Thank you for joining me tonight. I hope you are all like warm and cozy. I just checked the weather. My phone says 9 degrees, but when I checked the official weather.gov, it says it's -2 right now. So I hope wherever you are warm and cozy and staying out of that -2-degree weather. So make sure that you pop on over to Edmodo because I'm going to have some questions for you today. My first question is really just about the book that you read in November. So I wanted to know, what did you think of Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard? Is there anything you wanted to talk about that you didn't get a chance to discuss in November? Also, I haven't read this book. Should I? Is this one? I have a huge TBR pile. If you don't know what a TBR pile is, that is a to be read pile. And I think I have like 70 books checked out right now. And I think I'm only up to $10 in late finds. That's pretty good for me. So, is this one that I should check out and read? Let me know. So yeah, what did you think of Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard? Anything you wanted to talk about that you didn't get a chance to discuss in November? I haven't read this book. Should I? Alright, so I'm going to pop that over onto Edmodo. So we are in the small group for Walk Two Moons tonight. That is the book that we are discussing tonight. And so, yep, I'm going to pop that over onto our Walk Two Moons group. Alright, there we go. Okay, and so, hi Brooke! I see Brooke posted hi. It's really good to see you, Brooke. I hope to hear from you tonight and hear all of your thoughts and hear everybody else's thoughts who are here tonight too. Alright, so Mr. Nick told me that when he mentioned that this month's book was Walk Two Moons, that a bunch of you guys were really excited because you had already read this book and you loved it. I have never read this book. I know, I'm terrible, right? What kind of librarian am I? This actually came out when I was in elementary school. When I was looking it up, it came out when I was 9 years old, so it came out in 1994, so now you know how old I am if you do the math. So I've never read it, and it is considered a contemporary classic book, and it's won a whole bunch of awards, so that's what I wanted to start with tonight. The most famous award that Walk Two Moons has won is the Newbery Medal. So what is the Newbery? So the John Newbery Medal is a literary award given by the Association of Library Service to Children, and that's a division of the American Library Association. That's a big group of librarians who get together and they talk about libraries and books and how better to serve the people who use libraries. So this award is given to the author of, quote, the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children. So I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts on that. What do you think of this book? And then, so that award is a huge deal. Getting the Newbery Award medal is like phenomenal for a children's author. It's a really big deal. So here is a quote I found from Sharon Creech, the author of Walk Two Moons. Here's a quote I found from her on what it was like to win probably the biggest award in children's literature for a children's author. And she said, so this is a quote from Sharon Creech. I have often told the story of how I was living in England in 1995, and one cold, gray February day, about 8 months after Walk Two Moons was published, I was struggling with the end of the next book, Chasing Redbird. As I stepped out into our tiny backyard to scream, the phone rang. On the other end of the phone was Kathleen Horning, calling from the American Library Association convention in Philadelphia. She informed me that Walk Two Moons had received the Newbery Medal. To say I was shocked is a vast understatement. I had no idea my book was even being considered, nor how the awards were made. I think I kept asking Kathleen Horning, "Are you kidding?" At the end of the call, the entire committee shouted from the background, "Huzzah! Huzzah!" When someone from my publisher called shortly afterwards, I asked, "How many of these medals are given out each year?" She replied, "One, Sharon. One." You might think I would be deliriously excited, and I was. But I was also terrified, because I didn't know what to expect next. I was not prepared for the deluge of calls, faxes, and deliveries, for the requests for interviews and for information. It took me a long time to get over the surprise that people were interested in my book and how it came to be written. People often ask if the Newbery Medal changed my life. The answer is yes, absolutely and completely. It gave me a feeling of immense freedom, freedom to write, and freedom from the worries that many writers have, like, will a publisher want to print my book, and will anyone find my book? It forced me to learn how to give a speech in public, something I dreaded in the beginning but now enjoy. It also gave me the chance to travel to conferences and schools all over the world, meeting readers and teachers and librarians. It is an enormous gift, the Newbery Medal, and I am grateful for it. So I thought that was a really interesting quote, because if you've ever listened to one of my digital chats before, if you've ever attended one of the live chats that I've been able to lead, one of the things I always like to talk about is how often writers fail. They fail and they fail and they fail, and their books get rejected and they feel like giving up. And some of the greatest authors that we know, these most famous authors and writers that we know, who we think of, they're successful now, so they must have always been successes. They failed miserably, and these beautiful, life-changing manuscripts that they wrote, some publisher somewhere rejected it and said, "Nah, you're not good enough. Nobody's going to read this book." And so what I really liked about in this quote, when she said that this was after Walk Two Moons was published, and she was already working on another book, Chasing Redbird, the follow-up, and she was really struggling with the end of the book, so she stepped out in her backyard to scream in frustration over this next book. And then she finds out she won one of the most major writing awards in the world. And so I just think that's a testament to how much fortitude writers have to have, how much perseverance that writers have to have. And so I just really like that story, because I always like to drive that point home, because I know that a lot of you like to write, and I just think that's an important lesson to know, because I like to write too, and I've been rejected, and it's a horrible feeling, because you pour your heart and soul out onto the paper, and you use the best of your imagination and knowledge, and then somebody says, it didn't work for me. But then if you keep going, you're going to find the right editor, the right publisher, and your words could reach the world. So I think that's such a powerful thing. And I also had some curiosity, because I'm going to circle back around to the Newbery winner idea. And I just wanted to know, have you guys read any other Newbery Award winners? Are there any others that you think other people should read? So I'm going to pop that on to Edmodo over here, and I'll get that posted. Alright, and it might look like I misspelled it, because I'm only spelling Newbery with one R. A lot of times people misspell it Newbery with two R's, like it's an actual berry. So Newbery was named after a guy, and his last name Newbery was only spelled with one R. Alright, so let's move on. So it also won a whole bunch of other awards, like the ALA, American Library Association Notable Children's Book. It won a Parents' Choice Gold Award. It was a School Library Journal Best Book. It won just a ton of awards. So a little bit about the author. So Sharon Creech was born on July 29th, 1945. So she's currently 71 years old. She was born in South Euclid, Ohio, and the name Euclid, Ohio might sound kind of familiar if you've started reading the book, because Salamanca, the main character of this book, she's also from Euclid, Ohio. So where Sharon Creech grew up and was born and grew up was South Euclid, Ohio. That is a suburb of Cleveland, and she grew up there with her parents. She also has one sister and 3 brothers. And she also used to visit her cousins who lived in Kentucky. And a lot of those settings really appear in a lot of her books. So she draws on a lot of her childhood, and that's going to be one of my other questions for you guys. She draws a lot on her childhood in the settings of these books. And there's kind of a feeling in writing. Some people say that you should write what you know, because it lends a certain amount of authenticity to what you're writing. But I guess that might be a little bit more difficult for sci-fi and fantasy writers. I don't know. I've never really met too many dragons or too many vampires, so I don't know if I could write what I know if I'm writing in sci-fi or fantasy. That relies more on my imagination. So her childhood appears a lot in these books. So it says on here that those settings in Kentucky and Ohio, they appear in a lot of her books, such as Walk Two Moons, Chasing Redbird, and Bloomability, and there's an allusion, so a reference to those settings in her other book, The Wanderer. So she took a lot of literature and writing courses, and that's when she started to really get into storytelling. And but she left America. She moved and became a teacher of English and writing in England and Switzerland. And so she did a lot of this writing. So to me, Walk Two Moons feels like a really classic American road trip novel. And I just thought that was interesting that she didn't write this classic American road trip novel until she left America and moved to England and Switzerland. So she then returned to the U.S. in 1998, and so she had been gone. She had been abroad in Switzerland and England for 18 years, and she's married, and she has 2 kids, a son and a daughter. So like I said earlier, she wrote this book when she was living in Surrey, England, and she wrote it in the early 90s. It was published in 1994, and it won the Newbery Medal in 1995. So I just thought that was really interesting that she went to England and she wrote this classic American road trip novel. And it really got me thinking how sometimes we have to step away from a situation or step away from a place in order to see it clearly. Or even sometimes when you move someplace new or you even just change schools, you get that nostalgia and that fondness for it that allows you to write it in really loving detail. So, like I said, she was born and raised in South Euclid, Ohio. In 1957, when she was 12 years old, her family made a 5-day road trip from Ohio to Idaho, and that had such a big impact on her that she wrote Walk Two Moons about it 30 years later. So, I had a question for you. Have there been any moments, big or small, in your life that would make a good novel later? And you don't have to answer it here if it's kind of a memory that you don't feel like sharing. Even if it's just something small, we don't always want to share those things that are really special to us. This is just something to keep in mind maybe for later, something that you haven't considered. So I will put that on there. Yeah, have there been any moments, big or small, in your life that would make a good novel later? You don't have to answer it here. So I'm going to post that over on the Edmodo site for the small group for Walk Two Moons. Alright, so I just posted that. I'll check and see here if we have anybody else joining us and see if anybody's answered any questions. Alright, it's loading. It's thinking. Those computers, they sure like to think. Brooke answered if you've read any other Newbery winners that you probably have, but you don't know for sure. A lot of those books that you read in school are going to be those Newbery winners, and I'm going to talk more about that later. All right. Brooke said you didn't read the book last month, but you definitely want to read it too. Okay, I'm thinking I have to read it. Everybody else has liked everything that he's written, and confession time. I've never read Percy Jackson. I've seen the movie. Okay, that's an even bigger confession. Like, you're never supposed to say that. Like, I haven't read the book, but I've seen the movie. That's a terrible thing to say. So I should probably read Percy Jackson maybe before I read Magnus Chase. I don't know. So I will definitely read Magnus Chase because it looks up my alley. That's why I also don't know why I haven't read Percy Jackson, because it looks up it's up my alley too. All right. So the inspiration for this book, I thought this was interesting. So I was looking up where Sharon Creech got her inspiration for this book, and she said this book began as a follow-up to Absolutely Normal Chaos. And this is side note. I also like to know where authors got their inspiration, because a lot of times that has led me to reading really incredible books. A lot of writers have fantastic taste in books, and they tend to like books that are off the beaten path, or they reference their own works that are maybe a little bit lesser known, and you can discover these hidden gems by finding out how authors got their inspiration. So Sharon Creech, she said this began as a follow-up to her other book, Absolutely Normal Chaos. In that book, Mary Lou Finney writes a summer journal, and as Sharon Creech began Walk Two Moons, she started speculating. She says, "I was merely speculating about what might happen when Mary Lou Finney turned in that summer journal to her English teacher. And a few drafts later, she had Phoebe Winterbottom and her wild imagination." And she says that Phoebe Winterbottom, so that she started off with this Mary Lou Finney summer journal story, but then that character of Phoebe Winterbottom and her like over-the-top imagination completely just leapt into this story about somebody else and took it over with tales of a disappearing mother and a lunatic. And then shortly after that, Sharon Creech was eating, and she found a fortune cookie. And she found this, before that, she had been eating fortune cookie, and she just took the fortune out and she dropped it, and then later rediscovered it as she was working on this book. And the message was, "Don't judge a man until you've walked 2 moons in his moccasins." And that was what was on the fortune cookie. And she was like, "Oh, there's the title of my book." And so she began a new draft of the book with a new character, Salamanca Tree Hiddle. And so that fortune cookie message inspired a journey, the Walking 2 Moons part, and that's how she got the title of her book. And so she says that this is another kind of testament to what it's like, the writing process. So she also says after that when she began Sal's story, all she knew was that Salamanca, was a country girl and she was going on a trip. And she says the rest of her story came out a little bit each day as Sharon Creech sat down to write. She says, "I was too stubborn to throw away the earlier drafts with Mary Lou Finney and Phoebe Winterbottom, so they found their way into this new draft, along with Ben, the Lunatic, Mr. Birkway, Margaret Cadaver," oh my gosh, I love that last name, by the way, Cadaver as a last name is like my favorite thing, and Mrs. Partridge. So I really liked that because as writers and as readers, characters feel real. And to get rid of a character, it would feel like you're committing murder. You're committing literary murder. And so she says she was too stubborn to throw away those earlier drafts. And for me, it would feel like, oh my gosh, I'm killing these characters if I throw away those earlier drafts and I get rid of these characters. I mean, I don't want to assassinate a character. I can't just take them out. So it's really funny, I think, how attached we as writers and we as readers get to these characters. They feel real. I mean, when they die on the page, it's like they're dying for real. We cry and we grieve and we mourn them. And then also, I have this kind of just popped into my head, and so I might type it down, I'm not sure. Have you ever finished a book and you've been so immersed in the world of that book that it stays with you even after you finish the last page and you close that cover? Or you're sad to leave that world. It's a really harsh adjustment to go back into the real world that feels somehow bland or boring, or that the world of the book felt almost more real than the world that we live in. Have you ever experienced that? And what was the book? So I'm going to think of how I want to phrase that over here as I go over to Edmodo and I type that, because that question just popped in my head. That was not one I have pre-written. So I'm going to type that over here and just say, has there ever been a book that you have been, where you've been sad to leave its world when it's done? So when you've been sad to leave the world when the book is finished, or even have you missed the characters? Does the real world feel less real than the book? Okay, so has there ever been a book where you've been sad to leave its world when the book is finished? Have you missed the characters? Does the real world feel less real than the book? Alright, so I'm going to post that one there. Thanks for bearing with me while I typed that question. Sometimes, the genius questions, I can't predict when they're going to pop into my brain. Alright, so the next thing that I wanted to talk about was criticism of books, and criticism of award winners, and criticism of books that you like, and criticism of books that other people like. So the idea of criticism, and a lot of you probably know this, but I'm just going to review this. The idea of criticism, the word critical or criticism or critiquing, when it's applied to a work of art, like a book, music, a film, or painting or sculpture, it doesn't mean necessarily anything negative. It just means you're looking at it through a critic's eye. So really all it is, the definition of criticism as it applies to a work of art, and books are a work of art, so that idea of criticism is the analysis and judgment of the merits and faults of a literary or artistic work. So I wanted to talk about that in relationship to award winners. And just to say that you are allowed to critique something that's won an award. Just because something's won an award doesn't mean you have to like it. And you're allowed to like something that someone else critiques. And you can even like a book or passionately love a book, and you can still find issues with it, or you can still critique it. You can still look at and judge the merits and faults of it as a work, as long as you can back it up. So, so some of the criticisms about Walk Two Moons is because it portrays Native Americans. Sharon Creech herself is not Native American, and that's fine. You don't have to, when you're writing, you can write about a group that you're not part of, as long as you make sure it's authentic. So that's one of the notions here, is authenticity. So she's not Native, which is fine. You're allowed to write about people who aren't part of the group that you're in, although she says that one of her cousins says that they come from Native ancestry. But one of the critiques has been from some literary critics who are Native is that there's a lack of authenticity and kind of a lack of knowledge that goes into the writing of this book. And how I wanted to tie that in was, this book has won a lot of awards, and sometimes we are really hesitant to critique things that have won awards, but people still were able to go in and examine this with a critical lens and find its merits and its faults. And I think that's great. It doesn't detract from the book. It doesn't detract from the successes of the book, and it doesn't mean that people can't like it, but it just means that some people have analyzed it and found certain faults with it, and some people have analyzed it and found a lot of merits with it. And we can have a really great, open, and honest debate about literary works and poetry and sculpture and art and music. And that leads me to my next question. So, has there ever been a book about which you had an opinion that was different from everyone else's? Have you ever argued with someone over a book or another piece of art, like music or a movie? And I really like those debates because art is what we call subjective. You cannot say, oh, this book is terrible, nobody should ever read it, let's get rid of it, it's my opinion is the only opinion, or this music is the worst, even though, we've all felt that, like, somebody else's taste in music is, like, not as good as ours. We all have the best taste in music and jokes and art, but it's subjective. It's all based on our own personal opinion, although we do have to back it up, like, you cite lines from the book and you look at specific aspects of art or music, things that do work for you and don't work for you. So I just wanted to know, has there ever been a book about which, or it could be anything, it could be music, that you had an opinion that was different from everyone else's? And I think this is especially important for you guys because you are being told to read certain books, and a lot of these books have been deemed, the ones that you're assigned to read in school, what's really great about this book club is you guys have a lot of say in what you get to read, and I think that's really important, that self-directed exploration of literature. But in school, you're assigned a lot of books to read, and they're books that other people have decided are important, and they're very important books to read, but at the same time, you're also told that it's kind of implied that you have to read them and you also have to think that they're very important. But it's okay to say, that didn't work for me, as long as you can back it up. And I think that actually makes art and music and poetry and sculpture better if we can examine it and we can talk about the faults openly and honestly. Because these creators of this art, they're just human, so they're fallible, they can make mistakes. And there are a lot of writers who actually, after they've published a book, and there's one in particular, it just popped in my head, it'll take me a few minutes to think on it. He wrote this classic novel that as soon as it was published, it was immensely popular, and it won all these awards. And then when the second edition was published, he wrote this big, long letter at the beginning. He went through and he read his book with a critical eye. He applied that critic's lens to it, and he found all these faults in his work, and he wrote a whole preface to the book saying all of the things, if he were to sit down and write the book that day, he would change from his first edition. So he saw ways that he could improve on his writing. Of course, in his case, he was a genius, and nobody else even noticed those issues or those failings in that book except for him. So even artists, and actually, this is another point. See, I keep going off on all these tangents. Artists are usually their own worst critic. Have you ever heard that somebody's their own worst critic? That's usually the case with artists. A lot of artists, they say it goes like this. The creative process is, I've got this, I'm a genius, this is amazing, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. It's not so bad. This is terrible, it's never going to get published. I'm a triumphant genius who's going to win all the awards. This is terrible. So it's very much a roller coaster ride. So I just wanted to talk about that, and let me post that question on here about, has there ever been a book about which you had an opinion that was different from everyone else's? Have you ever argued with someone over a book or another piece of art like music or a movie? And then also kind of an end note to that question is, what was the end result? Like, was it a big argument? Did you guys come together? Did you agree to disagree? Which we all say, agree to disagree, and that's a little easier said than done. So let me get that question posted on here has there ever been a book about which you had an opinion that was different from everyone else's? Alright, so, and I'm going to add that on here. How did the argument end? The argument, or what was the resolution? Like, or was there one? Or were you like, never friends ever again? Alright, so you will get that posted there. Okay, so we are about ready to wrap up here. I'm going to go see if there are any more comments here. Sorry, I just read books, all caps. You have never read Percy Jackson with like 8 exclamation points and then in all caps, why? I don't know, Brooke. I had also never started Walk Two Moons. I know. Oh, and you know what else I've never read? Confession time. I've never read Bridge to Terabithia. I know. I never read any Natalie Babbitt until I read one of her books last week. And I have never read Bridge to Terabithia, which I'm kind of avoiding because I heard, like, you can't get through that book without just sobbing. And then I was talking about this with someone today. The more books you read, the more you realize there are to read. And there are so many tremendous, fantastic books out there. So even though I was talking about critiquing and criticism, just because a book, you might look at it with a critical eye, doesn't make it worth reading. In fact, it makes reading, once you start reading more criticism and looking at things with a critical eye, you get deeper, richer meaning, because it's not just the faults. Criticism doesn't, when it's applied to literature, doesn't just mean the faults. That part of that definition is the merit, so the good things about it. So there's so many good books to read, and there's not enough time. It's one of those things that's like, the more you know, the more you don't know. The more you read, the more you realize, I'm never going to read all the books I want to read, and why can't I just go live in a little cabin and spend all my time reading? But I'd also have to sleep and eat. Well, you can read while you eat, so that works. But sleeping, man, I just wish I had all the time to read all the great books. But if you guys have ones that you want to recommend to me that you think like, hey, Mandy, have you read Percy Jackson? And then I'll be like, no. And then you're like, lady, read Percy Jackson. And then I'll do it because I trust you guys because you have excellent taste in books. Yeah. All right, so let me refresh here one more time. And then let me double check. Hey, Nick, is the next meeting in 2 weeks? Is it on the...
Yes.
The 20...
From 4:30 to 5:30.
4:30 to 5:30. Okay.
It's going to be on December 27th.
December 27th. I was going to say December 27th from 4:30 to 5:30, but then I was like, what if that was wrong? And you guys showed up here and there was nothing, and the library was dark and cold and empty. and I invited you to just nothing. So yes, December 27th from 4:30 to 5:30, and you will be discussing Walk Two Moons, and I cannot wait to hear what you guys have to say about it. And at that point, I will have finished it myself, and I'm really grateful, you guys, for choosing a book that I have never read that's a classic. I mean, it's a contemporary classic. You have to read these books. So thank you so much. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. Stay warm. I'm really excited to see if it's dropped even colder than -2. All right. Have a great night, everybody, and I will see you next time.